If you grew up hearing stories about Canadian winters from your grandparents or great-grandparents, you might have imagined a world locked in perpetual ice, where rivers turned into highways and people casually chatted about temperatures that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. Those tales often paint a picture of unrelenting cold, deep snowdrifts that buried fences, and a season that seemed to stretch on forever. And while there's some exaggeration in family lore, because who doesn't like to one-up the younger generation with back-in-my-day stories, the reality is that Canadian winters of the past were, in many ways, more severe and consistent than what most of us experience today. To understand just how different they were, it's worth stepping back to the 19th and early 20th centuries, when reliable records began to accumulate. In those days, winter arrived early and stayed late. Rivers like the St. Lawrence routinely froze solid enough to support ice bridges, temporary roads marked out across the water where horse-drawn sleighs and even early automobiles could cross. Imagine commuting to work not over a bridge, but directly on a frozen river, with signs warning of thin ice spots. It was practical, if a bit nerve-wracking. Falls through the ice weren't uncommon, and communities had protocols for rescues that sound like something out of a frontier novel. Travel in general relied heavily on snow. Horse-drawn sleighs glided over packed trails, far preferable to mud-churned wagon roads in milder weather. Snowshoes were essential gear, not just for recreation but for getting around. Indigenous peoples had mastered these techniques long before European settlers arrived, and newcomers quickly adopted them, along with toboggans, for clothing, and other innovations, to survive. Early accounts from settlers in Ontario and Quebec describe winters where snow piled so high that tunnels were dug to barns, and roofs had to be shoveled regularly to prevent collapse. One 19th-century Ontario farmer recalled spending much of the season chopping wood, tending livestock in sub-zero barns, and occasionally venturing out for social visits that doubled as survival checks on neighbors. Cold snaps were legendary. In February 1947, the tiny Yukon community of Snag recorded -63 degrees Celsius, the lowest temperature ever officially measured in continental North America. Breath froze mid-air and fell as powder. Voices carried unnaturally far in the dense, cold air. Even in more populated areas, extremes were routine. Toronto's coldest day hit -31.3 degrees Celsius in the late 19th century, but earlier records show frequent dips below -30 degrees Celsius across the Prairies and Ontario. Winnipeg, often dubbed Winterpeg, regularly saw weeks where daytime highs struggled to reach -20 degrees Celsius. These weren't anomalies, they were the norm. Perhaps the most iconic celebration of this harsh season was the Quebec Winter Carnival, which began in 1894 as a way to boost spirits and tourism during the long freeze. Quebec City, already buried under meters of snow, erected massive ice palaces lit by torches. Parades of sleighs, ice canoe races across the half-frozen St. Lawrence, and bonspiels, curling tournaments, drew crowds bundled in furs. The carnival wasn't just entertainment. It was a deliberate act of defiance against the season that could otherwise feel endless. Life indoors wasn't much warmer. Before central heating became widespread in the mid-20th century, homes relied on wood stoves or fireplaces. You woke up to frost on the inside of windows, and the warmest spot was directly in front of the fire. Bedrooms were unheated. People slept under piles of quilts and heated bricks wrapped in flannel at the foot of the bed. Children often shared beds for warmth, and getting dressed in the morning involved a mad dash to the kitchen stove. One common trick was to heat clothes on the oven door before putting them on, practical, if occasionally leading to singed sleeves. Schools rarely closed for cold. In rural areas, children walked miles through snowdrifts, often following fences because the snow was deeper than they were tall. Teachers kept a sharp eye on ears and fingers for frostbite, and lunch pails froze solid by noon. In cities like Montreal or Toronto, streetcars ran on schedules that accounted for snow-packed tracks, but delays were constant. Commuters accepted that winter travel meant extra time, extra layers, and a certain stoicism. The Prairies offered their own brand of severity. With little tree cover to break the wind, blizzards could reduce visibility to 0 in minutes. Farmers told stories of getting lost between house and barn, saved only by guidelines, ropes strung between buildings. The 1940s and 1950s saw particularly brutal stretches. The winter of 1936 brought record lows across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, with temperatures hovering below -40 degrees Celsius for days. Livestock froze in fields if not brought indoors, and trains, vital for grain transport, were frequently buried in drifts. Yet people adapted with ingenuity. Ice harvesting was a major industry. Teams cut massive blocks from lakes and rivers, storing them in insulated ice houses packed with sawdust. These supplied ice boxes year-round, long before electric refrigeration. In cities, ice delivery men hauled blocks up tenement stairs, a job that built impressive forearms. Fishing continued under the ice. Communities cut holes and set nets or lines, pulling up lake trout through feet of frozen water. Winter sports weren't just recreation. They were transportation and social glue. Hockey began on frozen ponds, with games lasting until darkness or frozen toes forced an end. Skating to school or work was common in towns along rivers. Skiing and snowshoeing clubs organized treks that combined exercise with visiting neighbors. In the north, dog sled teams remained essential for mail delivery and supply runs well into the 20th century. One of the starkest changes from then to now is the reliability of deep freeze. In the past, a proper winter meant consistent cold from November to March or April. Lakes froze early enough for safe travel by Christmas, and stayed frozen until spring breakup in April or May. This predictability shaped everything from construction schedules, pouring concrete waited for thaw, to agricultural planning. Today, freeze-thaw cycles are more common, leading to treacherous ice conditions and shorter seasons for traditional activities. Historical weather data backs up the anecdotes. Environment Canada records show that average winter temperatures across much of the country were 1 to 3 degrees Celsius colder in the early to mid-20th century than in recent decades. Snowfall totals were higher and more consistent, especially in the Great Lakes region where lake-effect snowbands dumped meters annually. The winter of 1976 to 77, one of the coldest on record for eastern Canada, saw Montreal buried under 4.5 meters of snow total, with single storms dropping over a meter. Even milder regions felt the difference. Vancouver and Victoria, now known for rain and occasional flurries, regularly saw sustained freezes into the 1950s. The Strait of Georgia froze in extreme years, and snow stuck around for weeks rather than melting by noon. Ottawa's Rideau Canal, now famous for the world's longest skating rink, froze reliably every year. In the past, it often opened by Christmas and stayed open into March. Skaters commuted along it, vendors sold hot drinks from booths on the ice, and the canal became a frozen highway through the city. Mail delivery adapted too. In rural areas, postmen used sleighs or snowshoes. The famous ice roads of the north, frozen rivers and lakes used as winter supply routes, were far more extensive and reliable. Communities that are now reachable only by air in winter once saw regular truck convoys over ice thick enough to support heavy loads. Food preservation relied on the cold. Root cellars stayed naturally refrigerated. Meat hung outdoors froze solid and kept for months. Butchering happened in late fall when temperatures guaranteed preservation. Families planned menus around what could be kept frozen outside or in unheated pantries. Practicality dictated cuisine more than preference. Clothing was heavier and more purposeful. Long underwear was standard, often wool that itched but worked. Mittens beat gloves for warmth, and toque wearing wasn't optional. Boots were felt-lined or packed with straw. Overshoes, galoshes, protected leather from salt and wet long before modern materials. Fur was common and uncontroversial. Muskrat, beaver, and rabbit-trimmed coats and hats. Medical care in winter presented unique challenges. Doctors made house calls by sleigh, carrying medicines that had to be kept from freezing. Appendicitis or broken bones meant risky travel to hospitals. Some communities maintained small local facilities precisely because winter isolation could turn minor issues serious. Frostbite treatment was common knowledge. Slow warming, no rubbing, and communities watched for signs in elderly neighbors living alone. The psychological aspect shouldn't be overlooked. Seasonal affective disorder wasn't named yet, but people recognized cabin fever. Long evenings by lamp or firelight meant reading, crafting, music, and storytelling. Visits were planned around weather windows. A clear spell brought a flurry of social calls to break monotony. Churches and community halls hosted events precisely to combat isolation. By the mid-20th century, changes began accelerating. Improved insulation, oil furnaces, and eventually widespread electricity transformed homes. Snow plows replaced horse-drawn rollers on roads. Air travel reduced dependence on ice roads. But many older Canadians still remember the transition years, when some homes had modern heating while others relied on wood, when cars replaced sleighs but still got stuck regularly. Comparing then and now reveals shifts beyond just temperature. Modern winters, while still capable of brutality. Remember the 1998 ice storm or Texas-level cold snaps in 2021, tend toward extremes rather than sustained cold. We get deep freezes followed by thaws, heavy wet snow rather than light powder, rain in January more often than not. Outdoor rinks open later and close earlier. Farmers worry about winter wheat surviving freeze-thaw cycles that heave plants from soil. This isn't to romanticize the past. Those winters killed. Hypothermia, frostbite, isolation-related depression, and accidents claimed lives annually. Modern forecasting, heated vehicles, and rapid response save many who would have perished. But there's undeniable loss too. The crisp certainty of deep snow for Christmas, reliable skating seasons, the forced slowdown that brought communities together in shared endurance. Today's Canadians still tough out winter, but with advantages previous generations couldn't imagine. Heated steering wheels, remote car starters, Gore-Tex instead of wool, apps warning of incoming storms hours in advance. We complain about -20 degrees Celsius days that would have been mild by historical standards. And when elders say, "You don't know what real winter is," they're not entirely wrong. The old Canadian winter wasn't just weather, it shaped identity. Endurance became cultural currency. Humor developed around it. The polite apology when snow from your boots dirties someone's floor, the national obsession with weather reports, the quiet pride in functioning normally when much of the world shuts down. Those deep freezes forged practical skills, community bonds, and a certain perspective on hardship. Understanding past winters matters because climate doesn't stand still. Whether current changes represent a temporary fluctuation or long-term trend, knowing what normal once meant provides context for what we're experiencing now. The stories weren't all exaggeration. Canadian winters really were, for generations, longer, colder, and more relentless than the ones most of us know today. And if someday the deep freeze returns consistently, whether from natural cycles or other causes, perhaps we'll dust off old skills, tunneling to the garage, stringing guidelines in blizzards, celebrating the season rather than just enduring it. Until then, the tales remain, of ice palaces glowing in Quebec, of children skating to school along frozen canals, of breath freezing mid-sentence and falling like diamonds to the snow. They sound almost mythical now, but once upon a time, they were simply Canadian winter.